So let's go to verse 23, and it says, "So the two men returned, descended from the mountain, and crossed over. And they came to Joshua the son of Nun, and told him all that had befallen them. And they said to Joshua, Truly the Lord has delivered all the land into our hands. For indeed all the inhabitants of the country are faint-hearted because of us." So are you hearing the report? They're like, yep. God has given it to us. Everybody's afraid. It's a positive report. And Jericho is a very important place in Canaan because it was one of the most strongest and most heavily fortified cities in Canaan. Now, if Israel could take Jericho, they could definitely take the rest of Canaan. And in all of this account, we can see that it was a good thing for Joshua to send the spies. Yes, they were able to see the land of Jericho and, how it was fortified. But as we follow the story, we're going to realize that it wasn't really the information that they brought back that helped them to actually take Jericho, because God's about to give them a strategy that, contradicts every type of military sense that they could have. So that was not really the purpose why they went. We could really say the purpose was Rahab. God saved Rahab in this instance, and the spies had a huge part to play in this deliverance. So let's move over to chapter 3. As the spies have returned, they tell Joshua what's going on. They tell him about Rahab. Now those 3 days that they were supposed to prepare provisions for themselves are over, and it's time to cross the Jordan River. From verse 1, "Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and they set out from Acacia Grove and came to the Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and lodged there before they crossed over. So it was after 3 days that the officers went through the camp. And they commanded the people, saying, When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then you shall set out from your place and go after it. Yet there shall be a space between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Do not come near it, that you may know the way by which you must go, for you have not passed this way before. And Joshua said to the people, Sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. Then Joshua spoke to the priests, saying, Take up the ark of the covenant and cross over before the people. So they took up the ark of the covenant and went before the people." So the ark of the covenant, the presence of the Lord, is leading the way. And it is important that it leads the way because the people of Israel have not been this way before. They have wandered in the wilderness, they have gone in circles, but they have not come to this pathway before. The Levites, they're bearing the Ark of the Covenant, and the people are distanced from it. Practically because it was a multitude, so they had to all be able to see the Ark of the Covenant, and also for holiness because when the Ark of the Covenant is in the tabernacle, any and everybody cannot go near to it. And so there must be that distance around it, even as they travel, because that is to maintain the holiness and the separation of the presence of God from the people. So the priests, they take the Ark of the Covenant. Remember, there's no cart for the Ark, that they carry it on their shoulders. And the people sanctify themselves and they prepare themselves to cross the River Jordan. The first thing that Joshua does, he sends the priests forward. And the scripture tells us that the Jordan River was swollen, so it was overflowing its banks. It's not a little trickling river. This is a boisterous river, and the priests have to go forward. So the first generation had the Red Sea, and now this generation has the Jordan River. And Joshua gives the instructions, and he is encouraging Israel to be of good courage. So let's read a little bit more from verse 14. "So it was when the people set out from their camp to cross over the Jordan with the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people, and as those who bore the ark came to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests who bore the ark dipped in the edge of the water, for the Jordan overflows all its banks during the whole time of harvest, that the waters which came down from upstream stood still, and rose in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zaratan. So the waters that went down into the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, failed and were cut off, and the people crossed over opposite Jericho." Then the priests who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel crossed over on dry ground until all the people had crossed completely over the Jordan. So the priests, they're going forward. They get to the bank of the river. It's only when they put their feet into the river that the river stops flowing and it gathers up as a heap. Now they can cross over on dry land. So we're seeing this miracle again with the Red Sea. When it was parted, the Israelites crossed over on dry land. There was no mud at the bottom of the river, which we would expect. Here we see the same miracle that supernaturally the waters stop, but also the ground becomes instantaneously dry. And as we read through this chapter, you will see that the Ark of the Covenant is referred to multiple times. It lets us know how important the presence of the Lord is to this endeavor that the Israelites are on in their walking into their territory and in them getting the promise fulfilled. And so Joshua, the priests, and all of Israel had to really trust God to be with them as they moved across the Jordan. And this miracle, I believe, was so necessary because they're about to go into Canaan. They're about to, really start to take the territory and drive out the inhabitants. So as they see what happens here, that they know that, first of all, God is with Joshua, right? Because God was able to do this with Moses before. So he's with Joshua and also he is with them. Now, this crossing of the Jordan is a big deal. And as we move over to chapter 4, we're going to see the account of the memorial stones. God's going to ask them to take stones from the Jordan to set up a memorial, like an altar, to remind them in time to come of what he did for them. So as the nation is crossing over, God is commanding Joshua to set up a memorial of this crossing. So from verse 1, and it came to pass when all the people had completely crossed over the Jordan that the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, take for yourselves 12 men from the people, 1 man from every tribe, and command them, saying, take for yourselves 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood firm. You shall carry them over with you and leave them in the lodging place where you lodge tonight. Then Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the children of Israel, 1 man from every tribe. And Joshua said to them, cross over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan. And each one of you take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, that this may be a sign among you when your children ask in time to come, saying, what do these stones mean to you? Then you shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be a memorial to the children of Israel forever. And the children of Israel did so, just as Joshua commanded, and took up 12 stones from the midst of the Jordan, as the Lord had spoken to Joshua, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, and carried them over with them to the place where they lodged, and laid them down there. Then Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests who bore the ark of the covenant stood, and they are there to this day. So these are the instructions the Lord gives to Joshua, that where the priests are standing, take 12 stones, carry them across to the place where you're lodging, and then he'll tell them where to build up that memorial a little bit later on. And then Joshua also takes some stones and puts a memorial right where the feet are of the priests are, in the midst of the Jordan. And there's a purpose to the memorial that God is asking them to build, that in time to come, when the children ask, what does this mean, that they'll be able to recount the faithfulness of God and the mighty works of God. Now, one thing I'm realizing is that the children were encouraged to ask questions. This is not the first time we're hearing, when the children ask you this is what you will say. And we're seeing that in Israel, as the children are growing, they're encouraged to be inquisitive, to be curious, and to ask about the history. And it gives the parents opportunities to share what the Lord has done. And remember, we tie it back to the importance of the children knowing their heritage and what the Lord has done, so that they do not grow up and turn their back on God. So after the stones have been gathered, the nation passes over and the priests come through, and the Jordan returns to its normal flow of overflowing the banks. The priests actually had to stand in the river for the entire time for the Israelites to cross over. And if you remember those eastern tribes, their families stayed in the land, but their armies came across to fight on behalf of the rest of the nation, just as they had promised Moses. So they cross over the Jordan and they arrive at Gilgal. And Gilgal is going to be a very important place in this entire book of Joshua. We're going to see that a lot happens here. And then after they go and do the different battles and the different wars, they always return to this place. So Gilgal is the place that the memorial is set up. Now the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they camped in Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up in Gilgal. So the name Gilgal means a wheel or rolling, and we're going to see where that comes to play a little bit later on. So we see the memorials being erected, and the next thing we're going to see at Gilgal is the circumcision and Passover. So their first Passover in the new land. That brings us to chapter 5. And chapter 5 starts off with this verse. So it was when all the kings of the Amorites who were on the west side of the Jordan and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan from before the children of Israel until we had crossed over, that their heart melted. And there was no spirit in them any longer because of the children of Israel. Wow. You know, the amazing things that Israel has been through, they have endured some difficult moments, some challenges, and some things that I'm sure that they would have rather skipped over. But they got to see God's hand at work in the midst of it. And not only were they spared, but it caused them to make a name for themselves with all the other nations. And can I just say that sometimes in our own lives, the challenges that we go through, we wish we could skip them too. Just press fast forward, right? And go to the next track. But many of the times God uses those circumstances to get greater glory and show how he can move in the lives of those who will trust him for their good. And so we are encouraged that, as we go through the challenges, stay with God, trust in God, because he will never leave us nor forsake us, just like he promised to Joshua. So the first thing that happens is a circumcision. All of the babies who were born in the wilderness were actually not circumcised. And circumcision, as we remember in Genesis, is the sign of the covenant, because blood is shed, and that lets you know that you are part of this covenant, this promise with God. So God instructs Joshua to circumcise all the sons of Israel. And it's to consecrate themselves to God. But these are not babies. These are like grown men, okay? So we know that it would not have been an easy thing for them. And that's why we read in verse 5, for all the people who came out had been circumcised, but all the people born in the wilderness on the way as they came out of Egypt had not been circumcised. So we're seeing right away that they need to be circumcised because they are in the place of promise and they are the covenant people of God. But look at the setup of God, because they have just crossed over into the new land. And of course, there are going to be enemies and opposition there. But the first thing they do, it causes them to be out of commission for a few days while they healed. So if you think of logic in our minds, you would say the first thing you do is prepare yourself for battle, right? You don't put your men out of commission before the battle begins. But remember, we read at the beginning, the hearts of the nations were melted because of what God had done. So no one came up to attack Joshua and the people of Israel right away because of the works that God had done. So God knew that they would be circumcised. God knew that they would need time to heal. And so God did a miraculous thing so people would leave them alone for a little bit. I mean, isn't that just the wisdom of God? It is so perfect how God orchestrates things. And as they are circumcised, the Lord says to Joshua in verse 9, this day I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. Therefore, the name of this place is called Gilgal to this day. So that's where we get the name, which means wheel or roll, in the name of Gilgal. Right. So God allowed them to be circumcised, and the reproach or the shame of Egypt has been taken away. And the shame has to do with their slavery, their bondage, and their captivity. Now they are a free people, truly free in the land of inheritance. After the circumcision, they now have their first Passover in this new land. So from verse 10, now the children of Israel camped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month of twilight on the plains of Jericho. And they ate of the produce of the land on the day after the Passover, unleavened bread and parched grain on the very same day. Then the manna ceased on the day after they had eaten the produce of the land, and the children of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate the food of the land of Canaan that year. So they're circumcised, they have the Passover, that is a reminder of how they left Egypt and how God was with them, and none of their firstborn was killed, while the firstborn of the Egyptians were killed that night. But here we're also seeing another very important point that I don't want you to miss. That after the Passover, the day after it, they ate, it says unleavened bread and parched grain, and then the manna stopped. Let me remind you of the manna. The manna was that substance that was like coriander seed that was on the ground every morning, right? How God provided for them, and they did not have to like till the ground, work the ground. They just had this supernatural provision. And God had given that to them to show that He would provide for them, that He was their Father and He was with them. But the moment that they got into the new land, and they had their Passover, they were circumcised, had their Passover, then that provision stopped because they were able to eat of the provision of the land. And it's such a great point to show transition in our lives, that sometimes one type of provision dries up. And it's not that God is unfair or He's unkind or He doesn't care about us, but it's because He's now put us in a place to be able to get a new type of provision. This provision came from the land, and it involved effort, involved work. And so God had graduated them in their provision. Sometimes we get so used to how God has done it before that we don't want the new thing. But the new thing is important because it signifies that we're in a new place, a new season, a new time. And I once heard Bishop Jakes say that every this has a that. And that means that, you get into the new place that God has been preparing for you, there are some things that are going to change. And we have to ask the Lord to help us to be courageous and bold, to embrace all that is new, so that we will maximize and really truly benefit from the promise that He has given us. So the manna has ceased, and now they're eating the different types of food from this new land.